Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review from Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. So, on the positive side is, this show is really interesting. I like the concept of it. And the negative side of it is it's to really be, this slowed out show, which it's if a whole season is 5 episodes, how productive are they really going to be with the show? Because in 2 episodes, it feels like we haven't really gotten into much ground upon the show. But that doesn't mean that this isn't a good show because of that. It's just there's an interesting thing about this. We have this kind of Bermuda Triangle kind of a show that has this element to it that's kind of drastically different than a normal kind of Bermuda Triangle kind of show. I've seen Wayward Pines, and Wayward Pines was a really interesting show that feels similar to this, but there is this kind of horror element that goes on also. Because in this show, at night, we have these people that appear and are trying to get at everyone in this town to persuade them to try and open their doors or open their windows up to them. And these supposed people are to actually be monsters or demons or kind of zombies in a way that are trying to go on and tear people apart within this town. So it kind of has this interesting kind of element of things, because we find out that these people are to use these talismans on their houses, I guess, to ward off these evil spirits. We find out that it seems that nothing is really going to work to try and go up against these monstrous beings that come at night that look like humans but actually aren't. And so we really just have these people that are in this small town having to figure out how to continue to live every single day, like having crops and having moonshine like resources to try to make it throughout their days, as tough or as complicated as it is. And so we have newcomers that are to make their way to this town. And so as we are newcomers to this show, we're kind of living vicariously through these newcomers that are making it into this town, forcing to realize that no matter how many times they try to leave this town, they can't really leave this town. And that all the people that have already been there for a long slog of time are just like, hey, let's just let them wear themselves out. And then, once they've gone and done that, then we can go and explain what's really going on and give them the heads up about how they can protect themselves. So that's kind of the teeing up of this show. So we have this family called the Matthew family, and they are to RV their way into this town and continue to go on in circle and circle and circle to go in a consistent loop into this town. And the next episodes are to kind of focus upon these people because they are to get into an accident, and then we're like, oh crap, we have to figure out a way before it hits nighttime to try to save these people, and also tell them the ways of which to kind of live here. But we have a number of people that are starting to lose their minds, or there are some people that have some mental issues or problems that are going to possibly lead to certain people's deaths. I won't be perfect with every single name upon the show, but I'm going to try my best to go on and like say certain people's names because this is the early stages of the show also, so I'm starting to get familiar with certain people. But anyways, let's go on here. So let's just go on to spoilers. Like there's an interesting element here. It's kind of hard to explain. Um, but eventually once you go into the show, like you'll be like, oh, I get it, because within the first two episodes they kind of thoroughly explain like what's really going on, and like there is no kind of easy way to live within this town. So yeah, so currently right now I think a lot of places will say that this is on Epix right now. I just went on to like Amazon and I just watched it for free. So um, like I don't know what Google is saying about it being on Epix because I could just conveniently watch it on Amazon. Um, but yeah, so with that said, let's double five this bad boy up. Let's just go into spoilers about this one. If you conveniently cannot be able to figure out a way to see this on Amazon because you may not have the budget for that, I have a number of different reviews that I'll go through and tell you a number of different apps that you can find through Google search or whatever to watch movies for absolutely free and shows for absolutely free. So if you're looking to see something else, let me say you could go through a number of other reviews to kind of check out a number of things that you can kind of more conveniently be able to watch however you would like to. So with that said, let's double five this bad boy up. Let's just go into this thing that is to be called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time you spoil from. So the beginning of this first episode, we have this mother and daughter who are at home. It seems that the husband of this family is at this bar and he's blackout drunk. And so the bartender is like, well, I'm not going to haul your butt home. Like, you can go and just sleep it off. So the bartender closes up shop and makes his way freaking out of there, or whatever these equivalent for out of there for this guy, probably sleeping in some bed off somewhere in his bar. So, bar. Anyways, this mother and this daughter. We have a daughter who is all of a sudden hearing sweet nothings from an old lady on the outside of this window. And for this girl, like, it seems that this sounds like her grandmother. So she's like, oh, yeah, like, I want to talk to my grandmother as she goes and opens up these blinds and is to see this old lady here. And so all of a sudden, this mother is to realize that her daughter is at this window and she's like, honey, no, like, don't do that. And we have the old lady that's just like, well, like, if you can only just open up this window, like, we can talk even better. And so this daughter goes ahead and does so. The old lady turns into this monster and goes on and not only kills both this daughter, but also kills the mother. And we see the brutal carnage of that when they are, of course, to wake up the next day. We have this Sheriff Boyd who consistently lives at this post office. So I'm like, well, was he like a mailman before? And then, like, I'm just trying to figure out the connection to that because it's weird that there's a post office that the sheriff goes to. And I'm trying to put two and two together there. So it must just be a convenient building because I'm sure a lot of these like places were just repurposed for whatever. So Boyd is to realize that the man of the house is coming back home. So Boyd is to grab this man and is to tell him like, hey, you knew better. Like you knew good and well that you had a kid in your house and you should have gone on and nailed these windows shut. You knew better. So Boyd is grabbing this man and hauling him into the carnage, which of course to be both his wife's and daughter's death, and just kind of like pushing his head right into the carnage in the horrific scene that is to have played out here. And so we of course have this man who's like, I can't look anymore. And so it's like, well, like, that's your mistake. You should have been home trying to help your family, trying to defend your home. Like, you should have been there. So we have Kenny, who is the deputy here, who's just kind of sick of the carnage and sick of consistently having to haul out dead bodies one way or the other. So we transition our characters to have these family members getting buried. Everyone's having a funeral here for these people. So all of a sudden, we have the Matthew family that is making their way through this RV. For the people in this town, it's a very rare thing that they have new people coming here. So anytime that they are to see new people, they have a plan in place, but it's been a while since they've seen anybody new. So the Matthew family is making their way through this RV. We have Jim, who's the father, Tabitha, who's the mother, Julie, who's the daughter, and Ethan, who's the son. So Julie is talking to Ethan and having this story with these kind of finger puppets, and she kind of has this like kind of weird like Zelda D&D kind of story and whatever going on. And so the way she ends the story is with one of the characters dying, and Ethan, not pleased with this story, is to complain consistently to his parents about whatever Julie is to do, to where both the parents are just kind of sick of Julie and her consistently um, being harsh on her brother, and so they're just kind of sick of this. So they're on this road trip, they make it through this town, and so Jim, who's kind of a little lost, is to get out of his car or out of his RV and is to go on and completely interrupt this funeral. Not even just like, hey man, like I need some directions, like he doesn't have any real like he's not gonna wait it out. He's just like, hey, like directions anybody? So Boyd, who is seeing these new people, is like, hey, like no one else like talk to him. I will handle this because like they won't get it. Like they just have to just tire themselves out, and then we'll explain it to them then because there's plenty enough time. The sun hasn't come down yet, so we can explain it to them. So we have the Sheriff Boyd talking to Jim and saying like, hey, well, yeah, just keep going on the road that you're going, and you'll find out. You'll find out where you're going. And Jim's like, okay, all right. So Jim takes the road, and they just keep going in circles over and over again. The exit, supposedly, this town gets them into the re-entrance of this town. And so, like, what the heck is going on? So they keep looping and looping and looping. And so Boyd is to finally just go on and be like, well, how about we finally put the road nails out there so then they'll have to finally stop. And then that's when we can tell them. And because they're never going to learn otherwise. They're going to keep trying and keep doing this. And so what happens instead is there is one car that is, of course, crashing into the Matthews RV. And we have them find out that this is going on. And so everybody's scrambling. We have Boyd, who has his son Ellis, that are wanting to go and help all these people out. So we have Boyd come out there first, and he's like getting introduced to all these people, and he's like, hey, because like we have the RV that is kind of flipped over, and so Boyd is just like, okay, I'm gonna like, is it okay if I kind of come in here and try to help you guys out? Because Jim is stuck like with this tree, and Julie is okay, but her back hurts. Uh, Tabitha is kind of knocked unconscious. We're not sure how bad her head really is because she's kind of really confused. And Ethan has this metal rod through his leg, and so we have an EMT. I believe her name is Christy. That goes on to come out there because this girl isn't like a medical doctor expert, but like she has to do the best that she can. So she goes out there, and so what they try to do is the other guys who are just kind of either drunk or high. Boyd is to cuff the one guy who is like completely like, I'm assuming he's high. Like he cuffs him to this car, and so because he's just kind of leery about this guy, he's very confused. So the reason why they find out about this car accident is because there's one guy who had like this scar over his head, or this kind of this wound over his head. They bring him to the hospital and they're taking care of him. And so now everybody scrambles. Jim ends up getting free from where he is, and everybody except for Ethan are starting to get pulled out of this vehicle. And so what happens is that Boyd is to have Ellis with his truck go on and take both Tabitha and Julie back to town because there's only so many minutes of sunlight left. So Boyd is talking to Christy and saying like, hey, do you think that you can stitch up Ethan like in this RV? And Christy's like, yeah, but like we can't. And Boyd's like, we'll figure something out. So Jim is to stick around, not really knowing what's really going on. And so Boyd is to kind of have to try and help him figure things out. But it still feels like none of this family really quite understands or probably believes these people. So, because at one point, Tabitha is talking to Ethan, and because of this story not going the way he wanted, Tabitha tries to help say it's like, well, it seems like your character in this story was killed by a monster. Like, well, monsters don't really exist, so your character's fine. Go ahead and play with this character, and trying to like comfort her kid. And it's like, well, yeah, like just wait till you realize there's a whole world full of actual monsters, and you're gonna figure that out. So Kenny is to go on and play with his dementiaed father, uh, who at some points is to be very confused. And so both Kenny and his father are to have this like chess match going. And Kenny said it's like, well, you know, I never really liked chess, but all of a sudden, like, it was the only thing that could keep me and my dad, um, like, to be, like, consistently talking, whatever. Because Kenny's father was to always pull people in to play chess. So, now, Boyd is to realize that there is this thing called a talisman that he's going to use in this RV, and then he's going to blind all the windows and all the like the windshield and everything in this RV, hoping that that will just work for this night. And so Ellis and Tabitha and Julie are all like driving like madmen with this truck to make it back into town. And so, considering it's nightfall, they make it to this one house. They're banging on this door, like, please just let us in, please just let us in. And they're like, hey, like, it's nighttime. I'm not letting these people in. And we have a woman named Donna who's telling them, hey, like, we know those people, let them in. And as we have these people that are kind of knocking on this door, all of these monsterish, spiritist? That's not a word. Like spirit, monster, ghost things are coming closer and closer to this door and wanting to talk to these people. So Kenny is to try to shoot one of them that does nothing. So they open the door, and Donna, because there's new people here in her place, she's saying that there is protocol with new people and they're going to have to tie them up. So they tie them up, they separate them, and then they, like, at some point tell Tabitha what's going on, but I'm not really sure they tell Julie what's going on. They just, like, show her some art, and they kind of let her see this window that is to be on a higher part of this place. So, like, they can look out at the moon, and just because, and so they're like, well, yeah, out of all the horrors that happen in this town, there is something that at some point or another is beautiful. So it kind of feels like Julie is oblivious to things. But Julie is just kind of getting to know rando people and so on and so forth, because Julie is to meet with Fatima, and after, like, Julie is to talk to Victor, who's this weird, creepy guy that's been here for too long, that's talking about sharing a can of peaches with Julie. And so Fatima goes on and takes Julie into her room, and so Ellis just kind of appears, and he takes his shirt off, and he's like, oh, I guess Julie's here, okay, rando girl, oh, okay. So yeah, so we have that all going on. We also have it where Tabitha is going to talk to Donna. And Donna has this horrific story to give to Tabitha, because Donna was to come here in this town at night the very first time she was here, and she had seen the tree. So she's like, yeah, everyone in town sees this tree. So that kind of tells them they're going to get stuck in this town. So Donna goes on and is to tell her story about how she arrived here at night, and there was a number of who she thought was people in the road. Her sister had gotten out to try to persuade somebody to move from out in front of this car, and this monstrous thing tore the face off of her sister. And so Donna, who couldn't do anything else, she decided to run like a crazy person into these bushes, because I guess anybody who was to come here the first time at night would just run into the bushes and just hide for however long until night came, or day came. So Donna is saying, it's like, hey, like, lucky you came here when you did. Because, like, Donna has been here for a number of years, and she can't get the screaming of her sister out of her head. Pretty much saying that a lot of these people have, one way or the other, like, seen some things, and they wouldn't recommend it. So Tabitha's like, okay, like, I guess, like, this girl is trying to give me the fear of God about what's really going on here. So I'm like, okay. So now back to Jim. Jim is in with Boyd and Christy in the RV with Ethan. And so Jim is starting to hear sounds of people, And Jim is like, well, hey, like, we should go out there and see if they're going to try and help us. And Boyd is like, those aren't people. Whatever they're telling you, whatever they say, don't listen to them. And Jim is like, what? Like, so Boyd is saying, I guess, for some odd reason, that this talisman is somehow working for this RV, but they're having to cover and blind all of uh, the windows and windshields, so that way these monsters don't see inside, and they don't see the monsters, so they would get persuaded to go on and be eaten by these things. So Jim isn't really believing the story, and so for Boyd, it's just like, well, hey, like, you realize that you couldn't get out of this town no matter how many times you tried. Like, so, like if you've gone and done that, like, you can believe in a thing like monsters, or probably at some point he's probably gonna have to really see for himself by making possibly a lot of mistakes in this town and getting probably killed off. Because I'm assuming that's what's gonna happen sometime soon. So Christy is eventually getting Ethan a sedative. They're kind of having to like uh kind of have this kid wake up at some points, kind of shaking and all these kinds of things, kind of like figuring out how to fix this kid. So at some point they pull this metal rod out of this kid's leg. I'm like, why couldn't they have done that anytime sooner? So because they had to do this quickly, horrifically enough. They had to do this, like, lives are on the line here. So they pull this thing out, and this girl stitches this kid up, and then they fall asleep in this RV. Chrissy is having this horrible nightmare that Jim was to go on and touch this talisman, just be like, hey, what does this do? And all of a sudden, all the demons start to come crashing into this RV, and then people wake up, and because Chrissy's having this horrible nightmare, I'm sure a number of these people all have nightmares in this town. So Boyd is telling Chrissy, "Hey, it's morning. We made it." So Jim also at one point was telling Boyd to, like, well, why can't you use your gun on these things? And Boyd's like, guns don't work. I don't think anything does. So now let's also cover Sarah Myers, who's freaking weird. So Sarah Myers, who's taking care of the new guy that came in, he he's getting water from Sarah, and then after that, which doesn't really make any sense to me, why give him water by what you're going to do to this guy next? Sarah then goes on and is to ram this, like, stick, it looks like a stick, through this guy's face, like through his neck into his mouth, and kill him. But then she goes further on and make it look like the monsters had killed him. And then she also opens this door for this hospital for a number of people to get freaking torn apart and killed and whichever. And so when Kenny comes back from this day talking to the father, the preacher, and saying, like, hey man, like, I don't want to see any more bodies anymore. Like, I'm done with this. Like, I'm so burnt out by seeing all the carnage and all the, like, I'm just not suited for this anymore. So the father is telling Kenny, it's like, hey man, like, you don't have to go into that room. Like, I will go on, I'll go into that room if that's what you want. And so Kenny just goes in the room to realize that his dad is dead. So Kenny is holding his father, his mangled up father, sadly. Kenny goes on the next day and is starting to chop up this piece of wood. Boyd is meeting with Kenny, and Boyd is asking, like, Kenny, hey, what are you doing? Why are you chopping up this wood? Kenny used to mention that he wants to make a number of other chess pieces because all of the blood had soaked in to all these chess pieces and ruined all of them. And that was a thing that both Kenny and his father were to just do, were to just make these chess pieces. So that's what Boyd is just realizing what Kenny is doing here. So Kenny goes back to his post office. I still don't really understand that. And he puts the piece down and he's just like, man, this world just sucks. So everybody has that kind of thought and whatever. But we have the Matthew family after the carnage of their first night were to all get back together and hug one another and make their way back into town. We had it where Ellis and his people, when they were trying to make it back into town, they forgot about the road spikes and every single one of the tires had got poked out. So they had to run all the way to the closest house to get in there for the night. So they find out that Sarah had killed these people. And so they're asking Sarah, like, hey, why did she do it? And Sarah has this weird, goofy explanation that just means that this person is freaking crazy. Sarah's to go on and mention that it feels like the reasoning why she did this was because she was, it was like a girl that's in a room filled with broken glass. That this girl was kind of seeing this room and not understanding why all the glass was there. Where did all this glass come from originally? And that this girl was trying to slowly but surely try to walk through this room and try and figure things out. And all of a sudden, Sarah was all of a sudden whispering like sweet nothings, having somebody tell her to kill these people and make it look like the monsters did it. And so, yeah, so like Sarah is Looney Tunes. Sarah's crazy. Sarah's a little crazy. So I would just be like, yeah, let's lock this girl up. By the way, the one guy who is like high off his lid, what ended up happening is they had to kind of drag this guy like over the shoulder, and he accidentally smacks into this brick while they're crazily trying to run to make it to this house. And so I'm assuming now this guy is probably unconscious or in a coma or something because of that huge smack of this brick. So yeah, we're gonna see like what happens with this guy, because I think the last time we saw him, he was like strapped to this bed. And I'm like, man, I can't wait for this guy to wake up and to be like, what the is going on? As he's kind of much more like conscious and clear and whatever. So yeah. So if I didn't say before, like they kind of they have to tie up every new person. When Donna was seeing both Julie and Tabitha in this place, they're like, hey, we're gonna have to tie them up. It's protocol. So like, yeah, they're tying up every single new person that comes to this place because they don't realize how dangerous this place really is. And until they get to know what is really going on here, then yeah, like so. So we're gonna see how all this stuff kind of plays out in the future. Hopefully, I've technically explained most of stuff within the show. Hopefully, I feel like I didn't leave anything out because, without a doubt, the show's really interesting. But I'm just like, I'm questioning like the productivity that this show is really going to get into. And I think that this show technically has 2 seasons. So if people are interested in this show, I'll keep going on and seeing what this show is to eventually go on and do here. So interesting. We'll see how it goes. So with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. I think I've explained most of this episode. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that I forgot about, if there's something that I went on and was to missay or whatever. Because I'm sure there's a number of names of whatever that I probably was like, oh no, that's actually that person. Like, okay, sure. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to go out of my way to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. One thing left. When Ethan was to make it back to a safe haven home and whatever, there's one moment where Ethan is to see some kid out this window who's kind of waving to him, and this is during the day. So a little confused what exactly that means. If maybe Ethan all of a sudden has an imaginary friend, or maybe all of a sudden uh, we're probably going to realize that some people are just going to forcibly at some point become crazy in this town, and Ethan might end up being another one of them. Uh, because this town, I'm sure, one way or the other, is to try to, at some point, drive people into madness, so eventually they'll get killed off. Might be a possibility, might not be, not quite sure, but I wanted to get that out of the way so I can talk about that and feel like I'm not leaving something out. Even though I could have just gone on to like, oh, I'll rebuttal in the next time in the next video. But anyways, anything else? Let me know in the comments below. Yeah. So that's it. Goodbye, everybody. Bye bye.